Forged on the gridiron in September. Perfected in the magic of March. For the fans who love the crunch of the pads. Prefer a dunk. And expect nothing but the best. This was the Big Ten. Now this is Bigger Ten. Here's Steve Deace.
Greetings, welcome to this week's episode of Bigger Ten. Forgive me, I'm on the road for the day job this week, but of course, with so much going on, we had to do a show. I'm Steve Deace, alongside my co-host, who will never be my partner, at least not in that context, the one and only Aaron McIntyre, who is still back there in the Bigger Ten studios. Aaron, good to see you, brother. How are you?
I have listened to very little college football content this week, so I'm loosely aware of what is going on in the sport that we're doing this podcast about, but for obvious reasons, I don't really feel like consuming much of it. We'll get to that. Sorry, I just started issue one for us.
This is the greatest self-promotion in the history of broadcasting. Welcome to our show. We haven't followed the subject matter. Frankly, don't care, but we're going to get into it nevertheless, right?
Yeah.
Is that where we are?
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah.
I like it. All right, let's get to the Big Five on Bigger Ten, because I know you at least paid attention to the first topic we're going to discuss this week.
No, that's what I'm saying. This is the topic that I didn't pay attention to this week because I already saw enough of it last week.
I bet you did. I bet you did. All right. I think we need to ask. Now, let's take a step back, okay? The Iowa State series in the last decade or so has been a relatively low-scoring series. This game actually went over the total, and only 39 points were scored, okay? So it went a few points over the total, actually, and only 39 points. So there's that, okay? Iowa State has had one of the better defensive teams in the Big 12 throughout the Matt Campbell era. So there's that, all right? And the caliber of competition was obviously better than Illinois State the week prior. But I mean, in the second half, Cade McNamara had 3 completions and 2 interceptions in the entire half. All right. I don't know how you cannot construct a play action passing game when your tailback's running for 170 yards. That doesn't make any sense to me. All I know is the offense that I watched against Iowa State, particularly in the second half, was a heck of a lot different than the offense I watched in the second half the previous week of the season. Just in terms of its style, its approach, definitely its execution, the play of the quarterback. So is it just the caliber of competition? Iowa State, that I think was 28th in the preseason poll, is one of the nation's leaders in returning production. Or, brother, is it Kirk Ferentz?
It's Kirk Ferentz.
He wasn't there the first week.
Well, it's not just that. The offense in the first half, actually, just against a better quality of competition, the offense in the first half actually looked a heck of a lot better, or a heck of a lot the same as the offense we saw in the second half against Illinois State. It really did. I turned to my wife, who was in the house, and I'm like, "What is this offense?" We were doing what is it, the play action looky passes to wide receivers 15, 20 yards down the field. I can't say I've never, but I haven't seen that from an Iowa offense forever. I mean, they were freaking pounding that. I mean, just obliterating the right side of Iowa State's defensive front in the first half, and a little bit in the second half as well. Just complete. And then they came out, second half, Iowa State got the ball. They had missed a field goal to end the first half. They got the ball, went 3 and out, shanked a punt, got the ball at the 42-yard line of Iowa State, and they came out aggressive. And I appreciate the aggression. There are some people who are saying, well, just run the ball to the right side again. Well, the reason why they were able to do that with effectiveness in the first half is because they were actually keeping Iowa State's defense off balance with the passing game as well. So they came out aggressively, tried to kill Iowa State with a play that Texas killed Iowa State with last year, completely blew up in their faces. And from that moment on, they scored a touchdown after that, the series after that. But from that point on, you could tell Kirk Ferentz says, don't do that again. Just run the ball. Just run the ball, do basic play. They played to not lose the game, and that's completely on Kirk Ferentz. And by the way, this vaunted Iowa defense is not absolved here either. He gave up 20 points and a half to an in-state rival. And I hope that they're really good this year. I really do hope Iowa State is good, because other than winning the game and having Iowa State have a winning season or a good season, the next best thing would be to lose the game closely and see Iowa State go on and have a great season. I don't really think they're that good, so especially given the attrition they've experienced at linebacker on defense. I don't think they're okay. They're not a bottom dweller by any means, but I don't think they're that good. This is just, I think a lot of fans are in the depression that I am, at least fandom-wise this week, because Iowa has not seen a game just completely a masterclass choke job like this in 10 years. It's been 2014 since they gave up a lead of 13 or more in the second half. And I believe it was against Nebraska, I saw the stat. So, Iowa State was, 2 of 14, I want to say, on third down. They had 89 yards rushing. These are just games that Iowa fans are not. And Iowa had almost 200 yards of rushing. These are just games that Iowa fans are not accustomed to seeing. And that's why the fan base this week is in the doldrums. And this is the type of thing, I don't want to be melodramatic. And maybe you can tell me. I talked to Mark Rogers off the air yesterday, and he said he doesn't see this happening. But because of how out of character this game is, this could be an unraveling point for this team. That defense giving up 20 points, and I'm not saying that 19 points is good enough to win you most games. You'd at least like to see 24 if you're Iowa, but good grief, just the systemic meltdown and clock management. Just pick your thing. It's either one of two things, the flukiness of this rivalry, or something's just not right with this team.
Well, to speak to the flukiness of the Cyhawk rivalry, we're going to now have that Iowa has not beaten Iowa State at home since 2018. And it's going to be until at least 2026 before they do it again, because there was no game in 2020 with COVID. And Iowa State won an ugly 10-7 game in 2022. So it is a fluky series. It's so fluky that I can't go where you're at, because I'm old enough to remember when I covered the team for a living. And I'm old enough to remember when Iowa State overcame a 24-7 deficit in the second half. And nobody knew if Brad Banks was even any good yet. And that Iowa team didn't lose a game the rest of the year. Named the score on many of its opponents, including my Wolverines, one of the worst Big Ten home losses Michigan's ever suffered. I think the worst Big Ten home loss Michigan has ever suffered to a team not called Ohio State. Brad Banks nearly won the Heisman Trophy, and that team almost won the national championship, So because it's so fluky, I can't say it's a definitive statement. But a lot of this, too, is the game was 13-0 at the half, and it should have been 21-0. And
yeah.
It's over. Yeah.
You can't have the ball multiple times within the 5-yard line and kick field goals. You just can't. Inexcusable. Right. Just absolutely inexcusable. I hope, that third touchdown the second touchdown that they scored in the second half, it did seem like they tried something different. They spread out the defense and then ran. I hope they figured something out in terms of red zone offense from that drive alone. But yeah, just an inexcusable meltdown.
How concerned are you about Cade McNamara right now?
I'm more concerned about his confidence, because Kirk just put the chain on this thing after he threw that interception. So I'm concerned about his confidence. I don't know how you can't be. I thought he played great in the first. As good as you could expect for the most part in the first half. But how Luke Lachey had 0 catches in that game is just criminal. Especially with Iowa State's linebacker situation. Yeah.
All right, let's talk about my favorite team. And I did a whole show about this yesterday. So right here on the channel, go check it out at Michigan Podcast. There's no need for me to delve any further into it. I went into great detail about it on Michigan Podcast. So the floor is now yours. With the 3-time reigning Big Ten champions, are they basically toast? Are we overreacting?
So the annoyance with the we won the Natty aside, it turns out all of your week one concerns were well-founded. And I texted another buddy of mine who's a huge Michigan fan, and he had the same take. It was alarming how easily Texas moved the ball on Michigan's defense. Everybody was expecting Texas to win this game, and probably by multiple scores. They didn't expect it to look like that, especially in the first half. So that was really alarming. And given the quarterback situation is what it is, I'm not totally sure where you go from here. You said on Michigan Podcast, treat this like a season reboot, but you've got to pick a direction to go. Either just completely make this the Alex Orgy show, or just roll with the punches with Davis Warren. You got to pick one of two things. This kind of mushy middle where everybody's just going to, you ride the fence, the only thing you get is a sore crotch. Well, Michigan's crotch is really sore right now trying to do both of these guys, and neither thing is working. So either design your offense around a running quarterback who is extremely limited passing the ball, or just count on taking your lumps with Davis Warren and his development this season. But yeah, it's all of these aspirations you had in the preseason, and not to say that they weren't founded given what we had, the intel that we had coming out of Michigan, but those are off the table now. So you're just counting on hopefully Sharon Moore, who signed as we're taping this today, who signed his contract, hoping that he is the talent developer that you think he can be, especially at the quarterback position. Because still on paper, you still have the dogs to be competitive. But when there's, as Jerry DiNardo said about Iowa's fall camp when he visited there, if you don't have a quarterback, you don't have a team.
Mm-hmm. There's no doubt. If you don't have a quarterback, you don't have a team. You don't have somebody the team can rally behind. And if you have a quarterback, your team thinks it always has a chance. So let's talk about USC. This is kind of the big five this week is we're asking questions, So is Kirk Ferentz the problem? Is Michigan toast? Is USC a legit contender? They beat LSU in that opener, which was a very well-played game between two ranked teams. They just posted their first shutout since 2011. And yes, I know it's against Utah State, who's not considered to be very good this year. But USC's played a lot of teams since 2011 that wasn't very good, as has everybody else. And they didn't manage to shut them out. All right. So they get a bye this week. They get 2 full weeks to prepare for Michigan before they play them at the Big House. Is it time to start talking about USC, who had a win total of only 7.5? And a lot of people said this would easily be the toughest schedule in college football this year, if not for the gauntlet that Florida is playing. Is it time to start talking about them as a contender, Aaron?
I think so. I can't say anything to the contrary so far. I mean, the best thing I can say about, superlatives aside from the LSU game, and I gave those out last week, and you did as well on Bigger 10. The best thing you can say about, a group of 5 team like Utah State is that USC just controlled it. They just controlled the game. They didn't get into some sort of dogfight shootout with a team like Utah State. They just controlled the game, the pace of the game, and that's the absolute best thing you can do. You looked like you were playing against a Mountain West team. A Mountain West team that is, traditionally, at least recently, a pretty good program, but you just controlled the game. So until I see something otherwise, and we could see that any week now. I mean, look at Oregon. They're continued to struggle profoundly against a really good group of 5 Boise State team. But until we see something to the contrary, I think you do have to put USC in the contender mix.
All right, let's go to topic 4, and therefore question 4. Is Illinois good? Illinois beats a non-conference ranked team at home, also for the first time since 2011. And honestly, if you watch this game, I don't, and you look at the box score, I really don't know why it was even that close. Illinois was clearly the better team. They really made Kansas's outstanding quarterback, Jalen Daniels, they really made him look very mortal. He was well under 50% completions, forced him to show he could make, connect on some long balls down the field, long intermediate throws that he just couldn't do. Took a lot of the running game away. Maybe because Luke Altmaier was just kind of so-so. And I think that's kind of a mark that maybe Illinois is pretty good if you're beating ranked teams and your quarterback played a so-so game. And that was the team that, when we did our just based on the BTN Camp Tour reports impressions, if we were power rating the teams, we had them power rated last, I believe. Mm-hmm. All right. So Illinois posts in week 1, post its largest margin of victory in a shutout since 1973. That's the year I was born. And now just beats its first non-conference ranked opponent at home for the first time since 2011. So, Aaron, is Illinois good?
Well, if I'm going to be logically consistent in saying that USC is a contender, then I have to say that Illinois, until I see something differently, is good. Now, being good is not necessarily being a contender. Those are 2 separate things in my mind. But they looked the part against Kansas. I mean, I went into that game, I'm just saying, I gave the advantage at quarterback, which is the most obviously important position on the field, to Kansas, and it still may play out that Jalen Daniels is a better quarterback than Luke Altmaier. But in this game, there was one team that was definitively better than the other. And Illinois had to punch back multiple times, and that's really encouraging if you're an Illini fan to see that they did have to take several punches, and they punched right back. So who knows what's ahead for this Kansas team. But I think through 2 games, really positive signs out of Champaign.
I agree. All right, let's get to question 5 and therefore topic 5. Nebraska back. What happened on Saturday? Huskers dominated Colorado. The game was not as close as the score. It was 28-0 at half, and the offense with Dylan Raiola basically didn't come out of the locker room in the second half. But the Nebraska defense terrorized Shedeur Sanders, drove him out of the game, had 6 sacks, I think 10 or 11 pressures and hits before he was finally pulled by his dad, Dion, to basically save him. They could not protect him at all. They couldn't run the ball at all. They finished with 6 yards rushing, Colorado did. So dominating performance by Tony White, and who's been an outstanding DC since Matt Rule brought him over, in that defense again. And this has been the kind of game that we've seen Nebraska lose a lot, that kind of next game to show us that you're back to being a viable program again. And, Aaron, one smart way to avoid losing all these one-possession close games we've seen Nebraska lose since 2017 is to no longer play one-possession close games, just blow teams out. So is Nebraska back? What say you?
No, but they looked pretty darn good in that first half. And the only thing that's giving me pause is the second half. As you said, the offense didn't even come out of the locker room. Now, they still pretty much handled Colorado. I'm sorry. It's not Colorado. It's not Buffalo. It's not the Buffaloes. It's just Dion. They handled Dion coming out of the halftime break nonetheless. I would have liked to see more signs of life from the offense after halftime. I don't think Dion is that good this year. Their win total is his win total, sorry. Man, I keep messing this up. His win total is was 4.5, 3.5, something like that. So yes. I still need to see a little bit more out of Nebraska, but still that first half against Dion was really, really impressive. And as you said, we're looking for baby steps when it comes to Nebraska. And I'm not saying that to be condescending. Nebraska fans know this better than I do. They just want to stack some wins, stack some positive things, and they have done that. The best you can be after 2 weeks, no matter who you've played, is 2-0. I know that's a cliche, but cliches are cliches because there's an element of truth in there. And so, they're not back yet, but they are doing some positive things a la Illinois too.
All right. So those are our verdicts. Aaron says Kirk Ferentz is the problem. Michigan is toast. USC is a true contender. Illinois is good. Nebraska not quite yet back. We'll take a quick break. Come back. When we return, let's play some Would You Rather. All right, Aaron, let's play some Would You Rather here on Bigger 10. And the very first Would You Rather, my friend, is for you. Which first-year coach would you rather be right now? Sharon Moore at Michigan or Jonathan Smith at Michigan State, who just went on the road as a 9-point favorite and won outright at Maryland?
That was impressive. It wasn't really on anybody's radar, certainly not your eyes' radar, but I would still rather be Sharon Moore. I mean, it's Michigan. Now, Michigan State, it doesn't have a lack of history itself, but it's nothing compared to Michigan and the resources that Michigan brings to the table. So, it's a really disappointing game, to say the least, for your Wolverines on Saturday. You would at least, you're in the position that Iowa fans have been in the last 2 or 3 years when you're playing really high-level opponents. Just don't get blown out. Well, you got blown out, and that's a really difficult place for fans to be in. But if there's a place where you can rebuild or reload quicker than anywhere else, including Michigan State, it's still Michigan. So even though it's, Michigan State has gotten off to a better start this year, I think, objectively, I'd still rather be Sharon Moore. This one is for you. Would you rather bet Notre Dame -10 or Alabama -16 this week? Two high-profile blue bloods taking on different levels of competition in the league that we follow.
Alabama -16 without question.
Yeah.
I don't know how many players on Wisconsin would start for Alabama. And I mean, this is an Alabama roster that's also had some turnover. They had over 20 guys hop in the portal after Nick Saban retired. But they did a pretty good job of bringing several of those guys back and then replacing them. They didn't get them all, like Caleb Downs is, wearing scarlet and gray right now. But I don't know how many Wisconsin players would start for Alabama. I think the difference at quarterback between Jalen Milroe and Tyler Van Dyke is solar systems. There's a key injury on the Alabama offensive line, but I don't know that Wisconsin has the defensive front to necessarily take advantage of that. They've got really good linebackers at Wisconsin, but I kind of feel like Alabama's are better, and that's probably the strongest position on the Badger team. So, I mean, Notre Dame is, I don't know where Notre Dame's psyche is going to be after that loss last week. That's got to be one of the worst losses in Notre Dame history. You're a 28-point favorite at home to Northern Illinois, who you paid $1.25 million to, more than $1.5 million to actually to come in and kick your ass. You've got to be reevaluating things. There's stories out that there's a shoulder injury for Riley Leonard, but he's cleared to play. Well, they have a pretty deep quarterback room, you know. Are some of those guys going to, be content to remain quiet and not play? Notre Dame's one of, I think, 7 teams in college football right now, Aaron, that has yet to throw a touchdown pass in the season.
Yikes.
And so that's a really deep quarterback room. I just kind of wonder where their psyche and everything is at. Purdue has beaten ranked Notre Dame more than any other Notre Dame opponent in its history. Purdue had a week off. Purdue looked good in week 1. I'd much rather lay the wood with Alabama against a Wisconsin team that I think will just try to play Alabama style, but with inferior players. Let's go to you again. Would you rather bet Oregon State money line over Oregon or Washington State money line over Washington? These old in-state rivalries are being renewed this weekend. Little clarification. Oregon is going to Corvallis to play Oregon State on the road. The Washington State-Washington game is actually, I think, in the Seahawks Stadium. And so the University of Washington is located in Seattle, so they'll probably have most of the fans there, but it's technically neutral site.
Given what we've seen from Oregon over the first 2 weeks, and Oregon State is coming in, 2-0 as well, with a shutout win over San Diego State last weekend. It's screaming Oregon State, but that's probably causing me to take Washington State over Washington. I have a greater level of distrust right now in Washington's roster than I do in Oregon's. So I would rather take Washington State money line over Washington instead of Oregon State or over Oregon. What do you make of what's going on with Oregon right now? I get Boise State is a really good. I said that, I don't know if it was preseason or last week, they might be in the college football playoff. They are really good. But Oregon just looks discombobulated.
Yeah, the Boise State running back, Giante or something is his name. He's great.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He had an okay game by his standards. He didn't run all over Oregon. Boise State's passing game wasn't that great. The one common denominator that I can find in these two games where the box score does not look like the game should have been as close maybe as it turned out to be. Now, the Boise State game isn't as obvious where that's concerned as Idaho was the previous week, but there isn't a lot in that Boise State box score that makes you think that Oregon would need, though, maybe not blow them out, but you needed a last-second walk-off field goal to beat them. The one thing that is consistent, they haven't been able to run the football. I know they've got some injuries on the offensive line, but, Dylan Gabriel's completing a lot of passes and throwing for a lot of yards, but a lot of them are dinks and dunks. They don't have a running game right now, and they're not stretching the field for explosives. That would be the one thing maybe I'd point to.
All right, this final one is for you, and try to do your best to be objective with this one. Would you rather be Iowa with its schedule, its roster right now, or Michigan with its schedule and its roster, both coming off of tough but different in nature losses?
Unquestionably Iowa, because you have a head coach there for whatever it's worth. Kirk Ferentz, if he stays above that 600 win percentage Mendoza line, is going to the College Football Hall of Fame. With Sharon Moore, he's facing a whole bunch of things he's never faced before. And as I said on Michigan podcast, the Michigan culture has been great, but the guys that are in charge now didn't build that culture. And they came in when the biggest disappointment was losing to Georgia in the college football playoff. This is the end of the longest winning streak in the regular season in the entire history of the Big Ten. Think of all the great teams in the history of this league. Think of them all. And Michigan just had the longest winning streak in the regular season any Big Ten team's ever had. This is the first time many of these Michigan players have been kicked in the balls. And almost nobody that had to endure the COVID season that almost got Jimmy fired is still there. There's a head coach there that knows how to recover from these kinds of events. Plus, the expectations are just way lower between the two sides. So, and another loss, and you're going to see some Michigan kids that could have taken huge bank in the portal and stayed here. are going to start thinking, listen, man, I stayed loyal. I did my tour of duty, but if our season goals are not on the table here, then, I got a future. I got to start making some business decisions. I don't think Iowa has a program, and Iowa puts a lot of guys in the pros, but not necessarily guys with that kind of a perspective. So I just think, until we see how Sharon Moore navigates this kind of a challenge, I would definitely rather be Iowa right now.
All right, that's it.
All right, that's going to do it for this week's Would You Rather. We'll come back with our Twitter poll results and feedback of the week right after this. This week's X poll results. I love this question, by the way, Aaron. So let me know what you think of the question and the results. Which 2-0 team that had a losing record last season will finish with the best record this season? Now, Nebraska ran away with this. 74% of the vote, okay? 16% voted for Illinois, who does still have a tough schedule coming up. 5.1% voted for Indiana. I think the vote for Indiana should have been higher looking at their schedule. Michigan State's next 5 games, they're going to be decided underdogs in all of them. So it makes sense that they only got 4.4% of the vote. But what do you think of the question and then the results?
Yeah, Michigan State to me is a non-starter. Nebraska has Illinois, Purdue, Rutgers, Indiana, Ohio State, UCLA, USC, Wisconsin, and Iowa. So you've got 3 games on there that I would say between Ohio State, USC, and Iowa, those are tough games. As far as Illinois goes, let me look up their remaining schedule real quick. Illinois has remaining Central Michigan. Penn State, that's tough. Purdue, that could be tough. Michigan, that still could be tough. Oregon, that still could be tough. Minnesota, Michigan State, Rutgers, and Northwestern. So, man, they kind of do have similar schedules remaining. I think I'm still probably going to go with Nebraska because I think they are overall a deeper team. This is 2 years in a row, we think, through 2 weeks, that they are packing a pretty good defense. Not to take anything away from Illinois, but I think the upside with Dylan Raiola is still much larger than it is with Luke Altmaier. So I'm going with Nebraska here. I think that is the proper.
Pardon me. There's another factor here, too, with Illinois and Michigan State having these early to midseason gauntlets, is their depth. Before they get to the part of the schedule, like with Illinois, for example, and is a better example, there's a lot of winnable games there in November for them. But when you're facing that kind of a gauntlet in a row, how beat up are you before you go into that stretch? You see what I'm saying? Whereas for Nebraska, their depth is really not going to be tested. Doesn't mean they won't lose a game or two, but their depth really, they're not playing a gauntlet of teams that are going to really question their depth until they get to that later in the year, when by then a lot of roles and stuff are defined. So that's another schedule advantage that Nebraska has. But I definitely think Indiana is worthy of more votes here, looking at their schedule.
Yeah, I 77-0. I don't care who it's against is really impressive from Indiana.
Right.
Western Illinois is really bad, though. They are really bad. But like I said, 77-0, that's really, really good no matter who you do it against. Maybe give them 5 to 10% more of a vote share on this poll, but I don't overall disagree with where they are here.
Okay, let's get to the feedback of the week. Shrimps 580 says, this loss to Iowa State is on Kirk Ferentz. He's holding the program back from entering the 21st century. And again, we're talking about a coach that I just said I think is likely headed to the College Football Hall of Fame. Aaron, your thoughts?
Yeah, they just tried to throw it in the lockbox after that Cade McNamara interception in the second half, and they played not to lose, and they deserved to lose. Iowa State deserved to win. I just don't see how you can put it any other way. That was just a really massive kick to the groin because, like I said, to lead this thing off today, Iowa fans are not accustomed to. You look at the box score; they are not accustomed to losing games like this. But this is what happens when you don't score touchdowns when you've got the ball inside the 5-yard line on multiple occasions. This is what happens when you let teams hang around. This is what happens when you try to go and put things in the lockbox in the second half and you don't at least stay aggressive on a few plays here and there. These things tend to happen, and you deserve it when they do.
Amen. You just can't let teams hang around like that, especially because this is, who knows with the linebacker injuries how good the defense is at Iowa State this year compared to other Matt Campbell years. But this is a more explosive offense than Iowa State has had, really, typically under Campbell. Typically, you have maybe the explosive tailback in a Breece Hall, but the passing game is kind of tight end controlled, centric. They can stretch the field here, and they've got a tailback who's a big play back too. And so you cannot let teams with big play potential, especially, hang around. You've got to bury them in holes when you have a chance, like Iowa did in the first half. So you turn them into one-dimensional in the second half, and maybe create some turnovers, and that's where you really turn the game into a laugher. And they didn't do that. And if you're going to let the game with a big play team, even if you're dominating them, but it's only they're one or two plays out of turning the game around and the complete momentum, that can happen to you. And that's what happened to Iowa on Saturday. All right, that's going to do it for us here on Bigger 10. Don't forget to like, rate, subscribe. Please do that. Share, follow, 5-star review, whether you're watching here on YouTube or listening on iTunes or elsewhere. When you do those things, it helps us to reach more Big Ten fans just like you. You can also follow us in between episodes at Bigger 10 on Twitter X as well, at Bigger 10 on Twitter X. For Aaron McIntyre, I'm Steve Deace. We'll see you here next week right here on Bigger 10.